The storm came out of nowhere like most bad things on Theta 9. One minute the sky was its usual dusty pink, and the next the wind was howling like a wounded animal. Red dust from the canyon floors whipped through the air so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Jake Reeves had seen plenty of these storms in his 5 years running the repair shop on this godforsaken frontier colony, but this one felt different. Meaner. He was just pulling down the metal shutters on his workshop when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Metal tearing. Rock breaking. Something massive hitting the ground hard. The crash echoed through the canyon walls and Jake felt it in his chest. Every sensible part of his brain told him to lock up and wait it out. Storms like this killed people. The dust got in your lungs, your eyes, your equipment. Visibility was zero. But Jake had never been great at listening to the sensible parts of his brain. He grabbed his heavy-duty toolkit, the one with the plasma cutter and the emergency welder. He clipped an emergency beacon to his belt and pulled his breather mask over his face. The walk took 20 minutes but it felt like hours. The wind pushed against him like it had hands. Twice he nearly turned back. But something kept pulling him forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was stupidity. On Theta 9 those two things looked pretty similar. When he finally found the crash site, it took his breath away. A spacecraft had carved a trench through solid rock, leaving molten stone cooling in its wake. But this wasn't like the junky cargo haulers and mining ships he fixed every day. This thing was beautiful in a way that made his mechanic brain go quiet. The hull curved like it had been grown instead of built. The metal, if it even was metal, seemed to shimmer with colors that shouldn't exist. Jake approached carefully. The ship's side had split open, probably on impact. Inside, emergency lights flickered red, casting strange shadows. And there, trapped under what looked like a collapsed support beam, was something that made Jake question his own eyes. It looked like the dragons from those old Earth stories his grandmother used to tell. Scaled body, long neck, wings that were folded at angles that made Jake wince. But the scales were wrong. They were pure white, so white they almost glowed in the dim light. Like fresh snow. Like starlight made solid. The creature's chest was moving but barely. Shallow breaths that came too slow. Its eyes opened, and Jake found himself staring into pale gold irises that held more intelligence than any animal should have. The creature looked at him, and Jake saw something in those eyes that hit him hard. Resignation. It was giving up. It thought it was going to die here. Not on my watch, Jake muttered, dropping to his knees beside the wreckage. The next 3 days blurred together into one long stretch of work. Jake barely left the crashed ship. He hauled equipment from his shop, making trip after trip through the dying storm. His medical supplies were basic, meant for treating human cuts and burns, but he made them work. The creature's biology was alien, sure, but some things were universal. Burns needed cooling. Wounds needed sealing. Broken bones needed stabilizing. The creature had radiation burns across its chest and wings. Jake rigged up a makeshift life support system using spare oxygen tanks and a battery pack from an old mining drone. He didn't know if the creature breathed oxygen, but it seemed to help. He worked through 2 nights without sleeping, existing on coffee and adrenaline. By the 3rd day something changed. The creature's breathing got stronger, steadier. Those golden eyes started following him as he moved around the ship. Jake could see confusion in that gaze. Maybe wonder. He wondered what the creature was thinking. Why was this human helping? You're going to make it, Jake said out loud, even though he had no idea if the creature understood English. Just hang on, okay? We're almost there. On day 5 the creature tried to stand. It was shaky, weak but alive. Jake had spent the previous day patching the ship's hull with every spare part he could find in his workshop. The repairs looked ugly, like a quilt made of mismatched patches, but the diagnostic panel had flickered green. It would fly. Maybe not far, but far enough. The creature moved to the ship's ramp slowly, testing its wings with careful movements. Then it turned back to look at Jake. For a long moment they just stared at each other. Human and alien. Mechanic and whatever this magnificent creature was. The creature made a sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a song. Something in between that made Jake's spine tingle. Then it spread those white wings and with a powerful leap, it launched into the now clear sky. Jake watched until it became a white dot among the stars, then vanished completely. He walked back to his shop as the sun set, bone-tired and covered in alien fluids he couldn't name. He didn't report the crash. Didn't tell anyone what he'd found. On Theta 9 you learned quick that some stories were better kept to yourself. 5 years had a way of changing things on Theta 9. The colony had grown, buildings stacking up like metal boxes. More people meant more business, but it also meant more problems. Jake's repair shop sat on the same dusty corner it always had, but the sign above the door told its own story. Jake's repairs flickered in the evening light, the P completely dead. He kept telling himself he'd fix it tomorrow. Tomorrow never seemed to come. Inside, Jake was buried in work. Literally. He was shoulder deep inside a cargo hauler's engine compartment, wrestling with a fuel converter that should have been replaced about a year ago. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the grease already smeared across his cheek. The engine coughed and sputtered, making sounds that no healthy engine should make. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," Jake muttered, adjusting the plasma wrench for the third time. "Just a few more months. That's all I'm asking." The engine hiccuped, then settled into something that almost resembled a normal rhythm. Not perfect but good enough. That was the story of his life lately. Good enough. Jake. The voice came from the front door. Kelly ran the supply depot next door, and she had a habit of bursting in without knocking. "You watching the news feeds?" "Nope." Jake didn't bother pulling himself out of the engine. "News is depressing. Rather not know what's going wrong in the galaxy today." "Well, you should know about this one." Kelly's footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as she walked closer. Megacorp is buying out the whole eastern sector. They're making offers to everyone. Jake finally extracted himself from the engine, wiping his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth at this point. "Good for them." "Not interested." Kelly's face was serious. She was usually smiling, always finding the bright side of things, but not today. "They're not really asking, Jake. They're telling." "Mitchell from the parts shop? You said no last month." "Yesterday, inspectors found 17 violations in his operation. They shut him down." "Sounds like Mitchell needed better safety protocols." "Jake, come on. You know how this works." Rodriguez at the fuel depot said no. Her license got suspended for irregularities. Chin at the electronics shop declined their offer. 2 days later, his insurance rates tripled. Kelly crossed her arms. "These aren't coincidences." Jake tossed the greasy rag onto his workbench, next to a pile of circuit boards and half-disassembled power cores. "So what are you saying? I should just roll over and let some corporation take the shop I built from nothing?" "I'm saying maybe pick your battles. You can't fight everyone. Watch me." Kelly sighed, but there was something softer in her expression now. Almost like she'd expected that exact answer. "You're the most stubborn man on this entire colony, you know that?" "I prefer determined." "That's just stubborn with better marketing." But she was smiling now, just a little. "Everyone knows you, Jake. You're the guy who fixes things for everyone. Doesn't matter if they're human or Centaurian or one of those methane-breathing Volth traders. Doesn't matter if they can pay you today, next week, or never. Can't take credits with you when you die," Jake shrugged. "Might as well help people while I'm here." Kelly shook her head, heading back toward the door. "Just, be careful, okay? Megacorp doesn't like people who say no." After she left, Jake tried to get back to work. But the conversation stuck in his head like a burr. He looked around his shop. It wasn't much. The walls needed painting. Half the ceiling panels were mismatched, replaced over the years as they failed. The equipment was old, mostly salvaged and rebuilt. But it was his. He'd built this place with his own hands, one repair at a time. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake stepped outside. The evening air was cooler, carrying the smell of dust and machine oil. He leaned against the wall, looking up at the stars beginning to appear overhead. Somewhere up there, among all those points of light, was a creature with white scales and golden eyes. Jake wondered if it ever thought about that night 5 years ago. Probably not. It was probably some kind of prince or important figure in whatever civilization it came from. Why would it remember one random mechanic on a nowhere colony? A transport rumbled past, its engine making a sound that told Jake it would need work within the month. He made a mental note. Old habits. Inside, he locked up for the night, checking the security panels and setting the alarms. The account balance on his terminal made him wince. Rent was due in 2 weeks. He had enough. Barely. Next month would be tighter. The month after that? He pushed the thought away. Tomorrow's problems could wait for tomorrow. He'd made it this far. He'd figure something out. He always did. As he climbed the stairs to his small apartment above the shop, Jake didn't know that his quiet life was about to explode in ways he couldn't imagine. Tomorrow would bring changes that would shake the entire colony. But for tonight, he was just a tired mechanic trying to keep his head above water, one repair at a time. The alarm ripped Jake out of a dead sleep at 6 in the morning. Not his alarm. Every alarm. The emergency broadcast system that only activated for colony-wide emergencies. Fires. Meteor strikes. Reactor failures. The kind of things that meant people were about to die. Jake rolled out of bed, his heart already pounding. The speakers mounted in every building crackled to life, and a recorded voice, too calm for the situation, filled his small apartment. Unidentified capital-class vessel in orbit. All residents remain calm. Colonial Defense Forces have been activated. Await further instructions. Capital class. That meant big. Really big. Theta 9 was a frontier colony. They didn't get capital ships. They got cargo haulers and the occasional patrol vessel. Jake stumbled to his window, still wearing the shirt he'd fallen asleep in, and looked up. The sky was just starting to lighten, that soft pink color that meant sunrise was minutes away. And there, hanging in the atmosphere like something that had no business being there, was a ship. Calling it a ship felt wrong. It was more like a floating city. The thing was massive enough that Jake could see it clearly from the ground, its hull catching the first rays of sunlight. The design was unlike anything human-made. Organic curves, sweeping lines, and a color that seemed to shift between silver and pearl. Jake's throat went dry. He knew that design. Everyone did. You learned about them in school, in the history feeds, in the whispered stories traders told in bars. Draconi. The Draconi Empire. Ancient civilization that controlled thousands of worlds across the far edge of the galaxy. Powerful enough that humanity had exactly one rule when it came to them. Don't bother them and they won't bother you. The Draconi didn't visit human space. They barely acknowledged humans existed. This was impossible. Jake threw on his jacket and boots, taking the stairs down to street level 2 at a time. Outside, chaos had taken hold. People were pouring out of buildings, pointing at the sky, voices overlapping in confusion and fear. Colonial security vehicles screamed past, their sirens adding to the noise. Kelly from next door grabbed his arm. Jake, what's happening? Is it an invasion? I don't know, Jake said, but his eyes were locked on the sky. Something was separating from the massive ship. A smaller vessel, though still bigger than anything in Theta 9's tiny spaceport. A shuttle. The crowd grew as more people flooded into the streets. Hundreds of colonists, all staring upward, watching the shuttle descend. Colonial Defense Forces had set up a perimeter, soldiers in body armor carrying weapons that would be useless against technology that advanced. Everyone knew it. They were holding rifles like security blankets. The shuttle ignored every radio hail. Ignored the military channels demanding identification. Ignored the governor's personal frequency. It just descended in a perfectly straight line, heading directly for the commercial district. Heading directly for Jake's shop. Everyone back. A security officer shouted. Clear the area. But nobody moved. How could they? This was the most significant thing that had ever happened on Theta 9. This was history happening in real time. The shuttle touched down in the plaza, right in front of Jake's flickering repair shop sign. Landing struts extended with a hiss of hydraulics. The hull was seamless, beautiful in a way that made human engineering look like children's toys. For a long moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its breath. Then the ramp lowered. The first figure that emerged made the crowd gasp. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. The body was powerful, built like a warrior, covered in scales that caught the morning light and reflected it like thousands of tiny mirrors. But it was the color that made Jake's heart stop. Pure white. Not silver, not gray. White like fresh snow. White like the creature he'd pulled from a crashed ship 5 years ago. Behind the white-scaled figure, more emerged. A dozen of them, all wearing armor that looked like it had been crafted by artists. Ornate designs, precious metals, nothing practical about it. Honor guards. These were guards for someone important. The white-scaled figure stepped forward, and the crowd instinctively moved back. Everyone except Jake. He couldn't move. Those eyes. Pale gold, exactly like he remembered. The creature's gaze swept across the crowd and locked onto him. Recognition flashed in those alien eyes. Jake Reeves. The voice was deep, resonant, and spoke perfect English with an accent Jake couldn't place. Every word was clear, projected so the entire plaza could hear. I am Prince Riker of the Draconi Ascendancy. 5 years ago, you saved my life when I was dying in the canyons beyond this colony. By the sacred laws of my people, I am bound by honor and debt. I have come to repay what is owed. The prince, this massive alien warrior covered in white scales, lowered himself to one knee. His honor guard followed, all of them kneeling in the dust of Theta 9's plaza. In front of a mechanic still wearing yesterday's grease-stained shirt. The colony fell absolutely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Somewhere in the crowd, someone dropped something metal, and it clattered loudly against the pavement. Nobody moved to pick it up. Every eye was locked on the impossible scene in front of them. A prince. A real alien prince. Kneeling in the dirt. For him. Jake's repair shop had never held this many people. The small space was packed wall to wall with bodies, all of them important, all of them trying to talk at once. Prince Riker had to duck his head just to fit through the doorway, his white scales scraping against the door frame. Outside, his honor guard stood in perfect formation, their presence keeping back the crowd of colonists who desperately wanted to see what was happening. Governor Patterson arrived first, his face red and sweaty despite the morning cool. He pushed his way through, followed by his assistant carrying a data pad. Then came the corporate representatives. Jake recognized the Megacorp logo on 3 different suits. Others wore colors he didn't know, companies from systems he'd never heard of. They'd come fast. Too fast. Like they'd been waiting for something like this. Mr. Reeves, Governor Patterson was practically vibrating with nervous energy. His hands shook as he tried to straighten his tie. This is unprecedented. Perhaps we should move this discussion to a more official location. The Colonial Administration building has conference rooms, security, proper? No. Prince Riker's voice cut through the noise like a knife through butter. Every person in the room stopped talking. The prince's golden eyes swept across them, and Jake saw several people actually take a step back. The human and I will speak privately. You will all leave. Now. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a request. It was a statement of fact. The room emptied faster than Jake thought possible. Governor Patterson tried to protest, opening his mouth, but his assistant grabbed his arm and dragged him toward the door. The corporate reps scattered like startled birds. Within 30 seconds, the shop was empty except for Jake and the massive alien prince standing in the middle of his workspace. Riker seemed to change once they were alone. His posture relaxed slightly. The warrior-ready tension in his shoulders eased. He looked around the shop, taking in the scattered tools, the half-repaired equipment, the flickering lights overhead. You do not remember me, Riker said. It wasn't a question. Jake leaned against his workbench. His legs felt shaky and he needed the support. The storm. 5 years ago. You were smaller then. A lot smaller. I was dying. Riker's clawed hand reached up, touching his own chest where the scales were slightly different, shinier. Scar tissue, Jake realized. You spent 3 days keeping me alive. You used equipment meant for humans. You improvised. You did not sleep. You were hurt. Someone needed help. Riker made a sound, something between a laugh and a sigh. Among my kind, these white scales are considered a curse. A genetic flaw. A mark of weakness. His voice carried old pain, memories that still stung. I was born into the royal family, but I was an embarrassment. They sent me away on patrol missions to the edge of our territory. Meaningless work. A way to keep me out of sight. Jake thought about that. An entire civilization that judged this magnificent creature as defective just because of color. That's stupid. Riker's golden eyes widened, then he laughed. A real laugh this time, deep and genuine. Yes, it is stupid. But it is our way. When my ship failed in that storm, I accepted my death. I thought, at least now my family would not have to look at me anymore. But then you came. He paused and something shifted in his expression. You saw something worth saving. You were a person who needed help. That's all that mattered. That. Riker pointed at Jake with one clawed finger. That is why I am here. In my culture, a life debt is sacred. More binding than law. More permanent than blood. I owe you my life, Jake Reeves. Before Jake could respond, the door burst open. A man in an expensive suit pushed his way in, ignoring the honor guards outside. Mr. Reeves, I'm representing Cordine Industries and we're prepared to offer you. Riker growled. It was a sound that came from deep in his chest, vibrating through the air like a physical force. The windows rattled. The tools on the workbench shook. The corporate representative went pale and practically ran out the door. Riker turned back to Jake like nothing had happened. They will not stop. Every corporation in this sector will want to use you, to leverage my presence here. They see opportunity. Credits. Power. His golden eyes studied Jake's face. What do you see, Jake Reeves? Jake looked at the alien prince standing in his shabby repair shop. This being who had traveled across the galaxy, who commanded warships and honor guards, who held rank and power Jake couldn't even imagine. And all Jake could think was how wrong this felt. I see someone who doesn't owe me anything. You're alive. You made it out of that canyon. That's all the payment I ever needed. Riker was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Then you understand nothing of honor. But perhaps that is what makes you different. There was warmth in his tone now, something almost like respect. I have risen from exile to crown prince in these 5 years. I fought for my position. I proved my worth despite my appearance. And I did it because one human, one mechanic on a frontier colony, showed me something I had never learned from my own people. What's that? That a person's value is not determined by how they look or what others expect of them. That compassion does not calculate profit or status before acting. Riker straightened to his full height. I will ask you once and I need you to answer honestly. What would you have of me? Name anything within my power and it is yours. Jake didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The question was too big, the possibilities too endless. Prince Riker told him to think about it and left, returning to his shuttle. But he didn't leave the colony. The massive warship stayed in orbit, and the shuttle remained parked in the plaza like some kind of monument. A reminder that history was happening. The next 3 days were chaos. Corporate representatives set up camp outside Jake's shop. Literal camp. They brought chairs, portable power generators, coffee makers. They worked in shifts, always someone there, always ready to intercept him with offers, deals, contracts. The numbers they threw around made Jake's head spin. Millions of credits. Percentages of trade deals. Exclusive contracts worth more than the entire colony's GDP. Governor Patterson called every hour. Sometimes more. His assistant would apologize, explaining that the governor was under enormous pressure from the colonial administration, from Earth, from everyone. They wanted Jake to ask for trade agreements, technology exchanges, political alliances. They sent him lists of suggestions. Hundreds of items, each one carefully calculated for maximum benefit to humanity. Kelly tried to run interference, telling the corporate people to back off, but there were too many of them. The colony security couldn't do anything. These people had rights, credentials, lawyers. They weren't breaking any laws by camping outside a shop. Through it all, Prince Riker waited. Jake would see him sometimes standing near the shuttle, arms crossed, watching the circus with what looked like amusement. The prince never approached, never pressured. He just waited with the kind of patience that came from living for who knows how many years. On the third evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Jake finally walked across the plaza. The corporate representatives surged forward, but one look from Riker's honor guard stopped them cold. Those armored Draconi didn't need to say anything. Their presence was enough. Inside the shuttle it was quiet. The interior was beautiful, all flowing lines and soft light. Riker sat on something that might have been a chair, though it was clearly designed for a different body shape. You have decided, Riker said. Yeah. Jake sat down on a bench across from him. His hands were shaking slightly, so he clasped them together. Your people have medical technology, right? Advanced stuff. Riker nodded slowly. Our medical science is millennia ahead of humanity's current level. The clinics here, they struggle. People die from things that shouldn't kill them anymore. Infections, cancers, organ failures. Jake leaned forward. I want medical technology. Not weapons. Not star drives or shield generators. Just medicine. Things that save lives. Riker's golden eyes widened slightly. In the soft light of the shuttle, his white scales seemed to glow. That is all you want? No. Jake pulled out his battered data pad, the screen cracked from being dropped too many times. He'd spent the last 3 days compiling information. There are 43 refugees living in the lower sectors. Different species. Some are running from wars. Others from persecution. A few are just kids whose parents died on transport ships. He looked up at Riker. They've got nowhere to go. Human colonies won't take them because of species quotas. Their own worlds won't take them back. They're stuck. Jake set the data pad down between them. If your empire could grant them sanctuary, give them a place to live, a chance at a real life, that's what I want. The silence in the shuttle stretched so long that Jake started to worry he'd asked for too much. Maybe there were political complications he didn't understand. Maybe refugees were a problem for the Draconi too. Then Riker laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that filled the entire shuttle. He laughed so hard his shoulders shook, and his honor guard outside shifted nervously, probably wondering what was happening. 5 years, Riker said, still chuckling. 5 years I have planned this repayment. I consulted advisors. I studied human culture. I ran scenarios. He stood up, pacing the small space. I imagined you would ask for wealth beyond measure. For technology to elevate your world. For political power, perhaps a position as an ambassador. I prepared for 1,000 possibilities. He stopped and looked at Jake with something that might have been wonder. Instead, you ask for kindness to strangers. Medicine for people you will never meet. Homes for refugees who are not even your own species. Is that a no? Jake felt his stomach drop. Maybe he'd miscalculated. Maybe this wasn't how things worked in Draconi culture. No. Riker's voice became formal, official. It is yes. It is done. Medical technology will be transferred to your colony's clinics immediately. The refugees will be granted full citizenship in the Draconi Ascendancy. They will have homes, education opportunities. He moved closer to Jake. And your shop is now under Imperial protection. No corporation, no government, no power in this sector will touch it. Jake felt something release in his chest. Relief maybe. Or satisfaction. Thank you. There is one more thing. Riker pulled out a small device, no bigger than Jake's thumb. It was made of the same shifting metal as the shuttle, colors flowing across its surface. This is a direct communication link to me. Not to my staff, not to bureaucrats. To me personally. The debt is paid, Jake Reeves. But what you taught me, that compassion expects no reward, that kindness is given freely. He pressed the device into Jake's hand. That is a gift beyond any price. If you ever need help, call me. Not as a prince to a subject. As a friend. That evening the Draconi departed. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, rejoining the massive warship in orbit. Then the warship itself vanished, folding space in a way that made Jake's eyes hurt to watch. One moment it was there, and the next it was just gone. Jake stood in his shop, the communication device sitting on his workbench. Kelly came in, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. So, she said. The mechanic who saves Princess. What happens now? Jake smiled, picking up a wrench. A transport's engine casing sat on the floor, waiting for repair. Now. I fix engines. Same as always. He glanced at the communication device. But maybe I keep the door open a little wider. For anyone who needs help. Word spread fast. Faster than light, it seems sometimes. The story of the human mechanic who saved a dying alien and asked for nothing in return. Who, when given the chance for unlimited wealth and power, chose to help strangers instead. It spread through trading posts and colony worlds. It reached Earth itself. People talked about it in bars, in government buildings, in corporate boardrooms. The medical technology arrived within a week. Draconi medical specialists came to train human doctors. The clinics on Theta 9 became the most advanced in the sector. People started coming from other colonies seeking treatment. Lives were saved. The refugees left on a Draconi transport ship, given new identities, new homes, new chances. Jake got messages from some of them later. Thank you notes in a dozen different languages and scripts. And sometimes, late at night when the colony was quiet, a white shuttle would land in the plaza. No ceremony, no announcement. Prince Riker would visit and he and Jake would sit in the shop, drinking coffee that Riker claimed was terrible but drank anyway. They would talk about everything and nothing. About engineering and philosophy. About the nature of honor and the meaning of friendship. The galaxy was learning something new. Humans didn't help because they calculated profit. They didn't save lives because they expected rewards. They helped because leaving someone to die, leaving someone in need, was simply unthinkable. That, the Draconi Empire discovered, was the most alien and most powerful thing about humanity. Not their technology or their weapons or their determination. But their simple, stubborn refusal to walk past someone who needed help. And in a small repair shop on a frontier colony, a mechanic kept fixing engines and keeping his door open, knowing that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything.